Good afternoon, my name is Dan Brown. I'm an engineer here at Fire Station 50. We're going to talk about the 2008 International Westmark Type 3. It sits on a four-wheel drive chassis with a 500 GPM midship pump, 180 GPM auxiliary pump, wet side stainless steel tank of 500 gallons as well. After you've come off of a road, off-road driving, we need to take a look at some things. You have your whole steering assembly here from the steering box down to the pitman arms, and also the front nuts on top of the spring hangers in the front. They've had a history of backing loose, so it's something that we always want to check. Moving back, make sure you check all your tires. If we're missing more than 3 lugs in a row, it's something that we're going to have to be very concerned about. Back here, some of the other concerns that we have is there's a large portion of our batteries. All the batteries in this vehicle are located here on the left side. Up underneath the framework here is all of our circuit breakers for the MDC, the radio, and there has been instances of them coming loose or having something get in there and making contact. So if you have electrical issues with a Westmark Type 3, always check underneath the cover. It's been removed for you to easily see. And check underneath this area, which is underneath the rear passenger on the left side. Continuing on, we've had a long history of mirror and body damage with these rigs. We've removed the lateral cross bracing to keep it stable, which allows us to pull them forward. If you get into an off-road situation where you have narrow roads, we highly encourage you to fold the mirror back to clearance it so you can get through. Okay, this can be done while it's still in the vehicle, but of course come to a stop before you do that. They can be pushed forward fairly easy. There is a chance of these folding back when driving at freeway speeds, but they can be tightened up, and go ahead and contact the shop and they can help with that. We've come into our engine compartment area here, and on the Westmark Type 3, there's primary, your concern is over here on the left side. You've got your coolant level, which is in this portion right here. They tend to be happy between the add max. Don't ever overfill because they will burp coolant all over the ground. Adjacent to that is your wiper fluid. The wiper fluid is actually found underneath the cab down over here. So make sure you put your wiper fluid in there, not in this portion. You've got your power steering fluid, engine oil and transmission, and then the air filters. Within the air filter, we have an ember screen that can be pulled out and cleaned if needed. And then we have our air filter system here. By simply lifting the tab and twisting, you can pull this out, okay? And you'll find 2 air filters within it. There's the primary air filter, and then the secondary cone filter. This secondary cone filter should be clean if everything is working right. The primary one is going to catch most of your dirt. The simplest thing to do is just tap it out, try to clean it out every day. We discourage you from using compressed air to prevent the paper element from getting torn. Okay? To replace it, it's quite simple. You just place the cone filter in. You take the primary filter after it's been cleaned, put it back inside, line up the tabs, rotate, and you'll hear it click. If you need light here in the work area, there's a work light switch that just focuses on this area. On the right side or officer side of the vehicle, there's some areas of concerns for us as operators. As I pointed out on the air filter element on the other side, it has an ember screen. On the Westmark Type 3s, there's an HVAC air filter that's built into it. It does not have an ember screen, and if you do not have your AC set on the max setting, the air filter element is exposed to embers and smoke and can actually catch on fire. So if you have tons of smoke coming through your dashboard, this is your primary area of concern. The prevention for us as operators is just run the AC on max all the time. We've had a lot of issues with some of the air conditioning systems and this thing's not working well. There's actually heater hose valves here that you can turn off and keep the hot water from circulating within the AC condenser box, and that will help your air conditioning improve its performance. So run it on max if you're in an area where there's embers to reduce the risk of fire. You can take that element out and clean it. It's quite simple. Just take the top cover off, pull it out, clean it, replace it. It's a paper element, so don't use water or compressed air. Some other areas that we can look at this is our pressurized tank for the radiator. This is actually the place you really want to check your radiator fluid. Pop the cap off, make sure it's cool, and check it out. And then also your intercooler hoses on both sides. One of the other items we'd like to talk about here in the rear axle is the axle hubs themselves. They have had a history of loosening and creating leaks. We've had a nice example here of what it starts to look like. It's just going to throw axle oil out onto the rim. You don't want to ever have these covered by a chrome cap. You want to keep them open and always check the tightness of these. It's extremely high in the foot-pounds of torque, but if they're backing out, it's something you want to go to ground support or contact the shop to get fixed. But this is definitely something you want to take a look at. Another area that we've had some issues with our Westmarks and any of these Zyco type chalk block hangers is they tend to get damaged or bent. You want to make sure that the inside span of this all the way through the length of the chalk block holder is slightly larger, within 1/8 of an inch of the width of this chalk block. If you are driving an off-road type vehicle like our Type 3, all of our chalk blocks by NFPA should have this plate in the bottom of them. The plate is designed to keep the chalk block from sinking into the ground if it gets pressure. There's a bit of an issue with the design. With these Zyco holders, you can actually slide the edge of the chalk block into the side of this ground plate and on the side of the chalk block, and it appears that it will hold, okay? And we've had incidences of them falling out of the holder. Okay, so ensure that the bottom plate is not part of the thing, and you're actually utilizing the outside edges of this chalk block. Okay, and that goes for any vehicle that we own with a Zyco chalk block holder. We're going to talk about some of the switching here within the cab and some of the procedures as far as operation. Over here next to the steering column, we have our main pump switch. It just says PTO. This is a PTO driven pump. When you need to operate the pump, it's a simple clicking it forward like that, off, okay? This vehicle can mobile pump with a main pump. We'll cover that a little bit later. But as far as the rest of the pumping operation, you have your auxiliary switches over here. We have the auxiliary pump, okay? Ensuring that your tank to pump is open. You need to depress this switch until you see the pressure come up over here, and always remember to hit the priming button, which is located right here. Okay. As far as operating the air conditioning controls, I spoke to you guys about the air filter element over there. You just want to simply put this on max. I tend to leave it there anyhow. Okay. As far as your lighting and master switches over here, we have all of our lighting switches located here in the bottom row. This vehicle does have an exhaust brake. If you get into inclement weather, you can turn it on and off here. We also have four-wheel drive capabilities and a 2-speed transfer case. If you want to switch the transfer case from high to low, you need to have it running, the park engaged, the transmission in neutral. You switch it from high to neutral. You pause for a minute to allow the interlocks in the transmission to release, and then you push it down to low. Okay? You then can release the parking brake and put it in gear. You're going to see a noticeable difference in your operating speeds. Much slower, much jerky. And that's in low is what I tend to mobile pump with. Now, we haven't even engaged the four-wheel drive portion. We just put it into low in the transfer case. In order to engage the four-wheel drive, all we have to do is hit this switch, okay? You can do that less than 10 mile an hour in the general range, but I always teach around 7, okay? If this switch gets tripped to right here by accident and you're in neutral, your vehicle will not move, okay? So if for whatever reason you figure out that the vehicle's not moving, always come in and check this switch and make sure the transfer case is pushed up to high, especially if you're going to do over-the-road operation. If it doesn't work into high, you can always try to get it into low just to get the vehicle to move. Here in the middle of our Westmark Type 3, we have a Darley relief valve, manual discharge relief valve, as well as our primer button, our auxiliary pump throttle, our foam controls, our on and off controls, our main pump pressure, and our auxiliary pump pressure, as well as our water level and foam level gauges. We've had some issues in the past with folks accidentally bumping this Darley discharge relief valve and turning it on with it set an extremely low pressure. If this is on and your parking brake is set, your PTO is engaged, and it's set very, very low, you may not generate pressure from the main pump. So if you are in a scenario where you're not generating pressure in the main pump, you've checked all your checks out on the pump panel, come inside here and ensure that this relief valve is turned off, okay? This relief valve, pressure is set here. You can check it from here in the cab with your main pump pressure gauge, okay? And this again is with the main pump gauge, okay? In order to clean this, because they are very sensitive to sand, you can loosen this valve and pull this guy out, and you can clean this screen, okay? We have a little bit, but not very much, okay? If this valve is loose, you also will not generate pressure, so ensure when you put it back in that everything is screwed snugly, and it just needs to be hand tight. You should not need to use a wrench. This is always done when the pump off. If for some reason your auxiliary pump will not start to do pump and roll operations, you can utilize the main pump. I would encourage everyone to pump it in volume mode. You come in here, you can turn your relief valve on, set it at a lower pressure, less than 100, because your nozzle operator is just off the bumper here, and pump in a low speed. Understand that the PTO will disengage somewhere around 1600 RPM, 1700 RPM. So it's not the preferred method, but you can do it. That's why we do have the pressure relief valve here, is to allow you to pump and roll with the main pump. In order to set your engine on high idle here with an international cab, you can go ahead and use the cruise control buttons. With the brake set, vehicle in neutral, go ahead and turn your cruise control on, set your throttle RPM to wherever you want, generally about 1,000 or 1,100 RPM, which we tried to today. Turn it on and hit the set button. That should set, release the throttle, and you should stay at whatever your set RPM was. In order to cancel, you can tap the brake or hit the off button, and that's how you do high idle. We're going to talk a little bit more about the pump panel operation and some of the issues with our Westmark Type 3s. We'll just start from the top here. We do have our water level gauge over here, which is backed up by a secondary water gauge here on the side. Okay, your main pump intake, pump discharge, okay, and some of the other issues that we have here is our Hale TRV valve. This is the pressure relief valve when the pump tends to overheat. If you're deadheading high pressures with these pumps, remember the max pressure is 400 PSI, but you need to move water through the pump, okay? If you see this light going off, it's only squirting water out of a small hose. It will not keep the pump cool, so we need to flow more water through our system. So if you're drafting flow water through a tank, if you're near a creek or on a hard water source, discharge water to the ground, or figure out another way to do that. Down here at the bottom, while we're talking about overheating pumps, we have the pump cooler and the auxiliary pump cooler, okay? The auxiliary pump cooler needs to always be on, and then if you're deadheading high pressures, the pump cooler should be on as well. But like I said before, the combination of this pump cooling line, which is about a 3/8 line, and the TRV valve, it does not tend to cool the pump sufficiently. So you can go very carefully, crack the tank here, but just remember with the Westmark Type 3s, you cannot pull these out like we tend to do on our Type 1s. If you go more than about a 1/2 inch, this pump will cavitate because of the way the factory plumbed the plumbing, okay? So that would be another reason that you would not generate pressure on this rig. We talked earlier about the relief valve inside the cab turn on or off. In addition to that, if this tank fill is opened and the pressure governor is running away from you, it's because of this. So do not open this very much at all, especially when you're doing your pump tests in the morning. Okay, so we talked about the TRV valve, our tank to pump. It's air actuated, as you just heard. We tend to run with it open. That way I can mobile pump and or turn on the auxiliary pump if I'm coming into an area where I feel I need water right away. So I run with that open generally. Another issue that we have with our Westmarks is the transfer valve. Okay, it's labeled pressure and volume. This is a 2-stage pump, 500 GPM. We tend to run these pumps in the pressure mode, but these need to be exercised. The shop would prefer daily, at bare minimum weekly, multiple times with water flowing. So start the pump up, start the truck, start the pump up, and move these transfer valves. Move them appropriately to prevent damage and make sure that they move, okay? From pressure to volume. On occasion, these lights may or may not light up, but you can see on the pressure discharge, if you're in volume, it tends to be at about 50 at idle. If you're in pressure, it tends to be around 100 at idle. Okay, so if you're in pressure mode, expect to see it about 100 PSI at idle. If you're in volume mode, tend to see about 50. So we talked about mobile pumping with the main pump. This is the switch right here to utilize to get it into volume. Okay, if you're pumping primary hose lines, you want to run it in pressure mode. Now we're going to talk about our auxiliary pump controls out here. Okay, the auxiliary pump, 3-cylinder diesel up top, about 180 GPM at max pressure, is controlled primarily here. We talked about the controls in the cab, and then we have the controls here. It's a momentary switch. You hold to start it until it starts. You'll see a little puff of diesel smoke come out, and then you should see some semblance of pressure here. Okay? If you don't have pressure, you need to hit the primer button. The primer button is located behind the keystone here. It needs to be primed every single time you use it because it's higher than the main pump and the water tends to drain out of it. Always prime it, okay? And then you can use your auxiliary throttle here to run this out. If for some reason another operator has the auxiliary throttle in the cab extended, you will not be able to make alterations to the throttle here at this cab. It's 2 cables going to the motor and they tend to compete with each other. So make sure the auxiliary cable inside the cab is depressed all the way so you can run it out here. And the same thing if you decide to get in, you press this one down to idle so you can control it in the cab. Okay? We talked a little bit about the tank fill earlier. I rarely mess with the tank fill. It just tends to create cavitation problems. You can use it to test your pressure governor by slowly moving it out, but any more than a 1/2 inch, it's going to cavitate. Back to the auxiliary pump controls here. The auxiliary pump only pumps water out of the 1.5 inch discharges, okay? So to simplify that, it's anything that's labeled in red. Here on this side, on the officer side, the 2 front bumpers, or the rear discharge, including the hose reel. okay? It will not pump water out of the main 2.5-inch discharges on either side of the engine, okay? As far as intakes, we have the primary keystone here. We have an auxiliary intake on either side, and we have an auxiliary intake on the right rear of the truck. These are wet side stainless steel tank vehicle. They do not like high pressure inputs. So if somebody is pumping to you, it's best to run it through the pump instead of directly into the tank. That way you can control it easier. But anything over 80 PSI tends to damage the tank and create some problems with the internal welding and supports. We're going to talk about our auxiliary pump here in the Westmark Type 3. It's a 3-cylinder diesel made by Daihatsu. Fairly simple layout. You have a small radiator here, alternator belt, an alternator. But if you are running this for whatever reason for a long period of time, you want to run it with the vehicle main motor running. At no time will this be utilized for extended hose lays, high pressures. It is a 180 GPM pump, but we do not use it for progressive hose lays whatsoever. The air cleaner's in here. The oil dipstick is down below this hose, underneath the intake side here. It's a yellow little round pull handle. Yellow round pull handle located underneath here. It's quite deep. Go ahead and check that. You can check your air cleaner as well. Also look at the exhaust out the left side there. Sometimes they do have a tendency to break. You can see that our flapper here for inclement weather has vibrated off. As far as the location of the pump, it is up above the truck. This is your relief valve, and this is the portion here that primes the pump. So you want to make sure that you prime that pump every time. Looking at our auxiliary pump enclosure here, you can see it's quite open to allow airflow, okay? The problem with that is this motor can collect debris up here on top of it and on the exhaust, and there is the potential for embers to start from that heat of the motor if you're running it for long term for doing light mop-up operations, so light operations. So make sure you check this upper area if you've been out in the oaks or pine trees, and make sure that this is all clear of debris. Here at the pump panel, we're talking about our pressure governor. It's a Pump Boss model. It does slowly move up and down, but it has multiple transducers within the pump, and those transducers are sensitive to being blocked by silt or sand. Okay, so if you're in the high desert or you're getting water from an unclear water source, there is the possibility that this thing may or may not continue to respond appropriately. If you can't flush your pump with a clear source, the quickest thing you can do is move to the RPM mode. Generally on these fires, we're only pumping 1 or 2 hoses, and having that pressure governor relief may not be necessary, so you can try to run it in the RPM mode. You can also reduce your pressure to an idle or under 50 PSI and open the main pump drain. If you start to see a bunch of silt coming out of the water, try to get a clean water source, flush this main pump out, and go from there. To fill our foam system here on the Westmark Type 3, we use the foam fill here, or you can open up the top hatch on the right side and you can direct pour into the tank on the side of the truck. But if you're going to use the foam fill system, we hook up our hose here, put it into the 5-gallon jug, make sure the foam tank fill is on, position thusly, push the switch on, and it should fill the foam tank up utilizing the foam pump. Okay. After you've done that, you want to go ahead and move it over to flush and push this down to activate the motor to flush the system. You should see some items coming out here. After you've utilized all of your foam system, you've refilled it, you've reset the presettings where you need to do, make sure that you turn on your foam line pressure release or activate it to release the pressure out of the system before you leave the rig, because it'll tend to hold pressure within the system and cause some damage. Coming around to the back of our Westmark Type 3, we've identified the direct tank fill. And remember, you do not want to fill this any greater than 80 psi, including through the main pump as well, but it will cause damage to the wet side tank. Here in the back, we have usually our hose storage and our reel line. There is a valve inside this compartment down here to the left to activate or pressurize the reel line. There is no controls on the main pump panel, so sometimes you may not have any pressure. So you reach within the truck, turn that valve on, and then you'll have pressure for your reel line. These reel lines should be 150 to 200 feet long. Okay? Our rear step here, guys tend to leave these down. Ensure these are always pulled up before you leave, especially going off-road, so we don't damage those rear steps. On our front and rear discharge here on our Westmark Type 3s, this particular one has a gated Y. It is foam capable because you can see kind of the red labeling. As far as the other compartments up here, we have ladders, various long handle other items, and hose. And that pretty much completes the back of our Type 3. Inside the cab on some of our Westmark Type 3s, there's a large yellow sticker that talks about tank maintenance. Okay, these are a stainless steel tank, but they do have corrosion issues. Okay? A large portion of the plumbing in our Westmarks are rubber hoses that bring it up to the front bumper and or the rear discharge areas, including our reel line. When the water sits in those reel lines, rubber hoses and tanks, with the vehicle plugged in, it creates a large corrosion issue within the pump and everything else. So the manufacturer mandates and our fleet services department mandates that we flush the tank, flush the plumbing every week, okay? If you read the service manual from Westmark, they encourage you to go even further, but definitely want to flush the plumbing, flush a little bit of water out of the tank weekly. Utilize that water around your station, whatever you want to do, but it definitely needs to do it because that water becomes acidic within the tank and the plumbing, so you want to flush that. Starting in the front of the vehicle, we go ahead and take a look, make sure all of our front bumper hatches are secure, look at the general condition of the spring, the tire as an overall, valve stems and any missing or damaged lug nuts. We have a missing lug nut cover here. But ensure that the lug nuts are still tight. There's no damage or anything sticking out of that tire. Once we get to the back of the vehicle, we want to check the internals of our wheel well here. Ensure that our exhaust hanger, obviously this is a cold one, is still sound. And then check within the tires that there are no rocks present or anything sticking out of the tires. We checked all of our lug nuts and hub nuts and make sure that they're secure prior to going on to the road. And I would also encourage everybody to just give the wheel chucks a quick shake to make sure they're secure as well.